liberalized women should be striving for. We think that it is very unnuanced and in its portrayal currently in status quo. But the second reason is the fact that oftentimes you have to sacrifice things. So by virtue of being a mother, for the overarching majority of individuals, you either have to give up your career in its entirety, or cut back on the amount of hours in which you work. We think that this is an unjustified trade-off that women have to disproportionately make in status quo. So, secondly, why is this therefore socially optimal? Note that our policies talk to things such as tax incentives, right? We think that the ability for a woman to also be an active participant in a country's economy, something which is beneficial for the state, right? Labor participation rates are something that states generally strive for. At the point where we think that women are able to engage within their careers in more long term and more consistently, that's a benefit to the state, and that's it's also socially optimal for that state. But secondly, in the worser context of the developing world, high maternity rates do not help the state, because we still see things such as infant mortality rates, we still see things such as high rates of women dying during childbirth. The reality is states need to act in what's the best interest for their own governance and for their own survival, but more importantly for their own citizens. What status quo does, it allows for women to be told that you must have a child, whether overtly or covertly, and those pressures still exist. We think it's high time that the state stepped up and leveled that playing field. On the side of opening government, we say enough is enough. States need to actively disincentivize childbirth and power to propose.
Thank you, Prime Minister, very much. We're very happy to call the Leader of Opposition.
Are we good to go? Panel, their case sounds a little idealistic. We tell you that shattering entire demographics of huge populations, creating huge political shifts towards the alt-right, and amplifying wealth inequality all over the world leaves feminism incapable of saving all of this from happening. Two things in my speech. Firstly, on how populations change and how population structures affect politics. And secondly, on class and welfare and how that becomes incredibly difficult on their side of the house for minority women and poor women everywhere in the developing world or the developed world to access the basic social services that they currently do. Firstly, though, on population. Rebuttal will be integrated throughout. Firstly, on population. We think that population structures affect politics. Why? One, voting behavior. Your demographic determines a lot about how you vote. As you have a greater share as a demographic of a population that votes in a democratic society, your demographic shapes voting outcomes. The second thing here is that there is a shrinkage in population structure that's going to happen in this motion for obvious reasons. We tell you that this changes the relationships that demographics have. As a minority becomes smaller, they are less likely to be in the political sphere in a way that the majority understands. They literally are more marginalized at the point where there are fewer of them because they have less voting power. They are more otherized because they aren't seen in mainstream society as much. They might be locked away into smaller schools. They might be more dependent upon welfare checks that are often organized in very racist ways, if they exist at all. So the second thing under here about population and how it affects politics for these purposes is what happens in developed states. This is what we want to focus on in this speech. We're talking about Sweden and the Netherlands, states that currently in the status quo face a horrible shrinkage of their populations. Apart from the fact that I do like those countries and I want them to remain, I don't want them to shrink, the more important thing here is that they're actively encouraging those countries to shrink. This causes a large economic effect that we think is particularly damning for them. No thank you. The first one here is that labor becomes unable to support pensioners. What do I mean by that? There is an aging population that comes as a result of this because literally fewer people are born. That means that the people who are currently alive now get older. And that means that there are fewer people re-entering into the population pool in order to support them. That means that it's harder for you to have social security because more people are old and they have to retire, or they don't retire and that's awful for them because they can't, they're just older and they can't work as well. But secondly, that means that pensioners are really harmed. It means that welfare can't be supported. There's lots of harms for old people who just have to go back into the workforce or who can't do that, who find it very difficult to travel. But secondly, older people hold it to themselves, hold all of their wealth to themselves, right? They, in their world, in the long term, we have to care about that, don't have any kids, or they have maybe only one who's super wealthy. Why is that bad? Because those older people don't give that money away. They never do that. We say they tend to accumulate it. That means that wealth tends to stay at the top. Capital accumulates. I think that's awful because it hollows out the poor echelon of society who gets less money to do it. What are the impacts of all the things I've said so far? It means that the only way that Sweden or the Netherlands can solve for this is by letting in more poor migrants to solve their economic problems. We think that this is harmful for a few reasons. Firstly, it leads to more inequality. Why? Firstly, we tell you that oftentimes in societies where this takes place, those states tend to become more racist. Where Sweden has the problem of calling people, this is where we see a large increase in alt-right politics. This has happened in Denmark, this has happened in Germany, this has happened in the Netherlands. No thank you. We think that is happening more and more on their side of the house. We think that it's only increasing at the point where they are developing more migrant relationships because, firstly, people happen to be racist. They have very negative views of refugees. They have very negative views of people who come from elsewhere. It becomes a building block for populist leaders to say, look, we don't like the way that the world is headed right now. We think that's more likely to happen at the point where these populations shift in the way that we've said they are closing.
So all your harms already happen in state school. What are
they
you going to do in order to solve this problem?
They get so much worse on your side of the house because everything that I said about how populations change. The idea being that as fewer people are born, that population gets, the demographic population gets older, it gets more conservative, it has less vital use in it. It means that people are less being able to relate to people younger than them, but it also means more people coming from outside of the borders who happen to not share their values when they themselves are quite conservative. We think that is harmful. But so this is very damning for them, this population argument, because it means that not just women, but all minorities are affected by it. The second thing I want to talk about in my speech, though, is about class politics, right? Those who have control over the economy and those who have control over the women over this policy are overwhelmingly ones who are wealthy women. They are the ones who have access to birth control, lots of education, lots of money. They talk about sacrifices, that I'm rebutting that explicitly, to jobs and to the time that women have. They are talking about very wealthy women. We think that is less important. I want to weigh the poor ones who don't have access to those things, who don't have a lot of economic mobility, who are often sheltered in some way. The harmful thing that they do with their mechanism is they create a norm that shames the poorest women that are there. They also talk about a familial pressure to start a family. I think that is so much not as bad as having as creating a norm that forces them not to have kids. There are so many reasons they want to have kids. Creating a norm that shames them is damning. Firstly, they make it less desirable. It shames people who have a religious value to this, like massive Mexican Catholic families, but also the fact that you disincentivize this via taxes means that poor women who tend to have more children literally have less money. I just think that's ridiculous because it means that the money is split even fewer as you have a seventh of your paycheck and you have 7 kids in order to organize. That's just backwards. But moreover, just moreover, just like we're happy for education campaigns, we don't think that's really part of the motion. The impact that we get from this sort of class stuff is that, and the norms, is that it is seen as their fault, that women's fault for having kids outside the status quo. The government and population tells them that they're not being feminists and they're not acting in a way that is okay. This is damning because it means that the feminist movement can't connect with single moms who didn't plan for this. That they are less likely to get housing, that they are more likely to be abused by their partners. It means that the sort of black welfare queen that has 10 kids in the United States gets no safety net. They get no support from feminist networks. It means that the normative forces lose out on a lot. We think that welfare becomes a lot harder for them. It's harder for you to justify demographic policies. It means that children aren't able to operate in a way that is good. Often children work for their families in farms and in parents' shops, especially as poor migrants. Those kids no longer have the opportunity to do those things. We're very proud to oppose this motion.
above OG in this round because they haven't done what they needed to do in terms of role fulfillment. I'm unsure how in the mechanism they're actually signaling to women to overcome the patriarchal structures, right? The argument that we get out of the DPM speech is that patriarchy is what shapes norms of motherhood, and that if we simply shame motherhood, we're going to get rid of those patriarchal norms, right? There's no mechanism that shows you how they are going to do that. There's a couple problems here. The first is that it's non-competitive for them to say that we're just going to work on things like giving contraceptives out. We're fine on opposition to stand by giving out contraceptives and talking about safe sex to a broad degree. Additionally, the arguments that they give you about things like, oh, but women can't drink coffee and can't drink alcohol, and it's really terrible, concedes the fact that the type of mechanism that they're defending doesn't work, right? Because what we told you is that the vast majority of women who opt into motherhood are not ones who do that decision based off of a rational choice. That is to say, we do think largely, we agree that there are social pressures. We do agree largely that people aren't thinking about it. They aren't saving up finances, etc., to be able to have children. Which means that on their side of the house, there's nothing that helps support these women who didn't make the conscious decision about whether or not to have children. What we told you is that these women are the most vulnerable, right? These are the women who didn't plan their finances out for the next 20 years. These are the women who don't get access to social nets on their side of the house. And we show you why we better help these women. We're winning the round. Firstly, though, I want to talk a little bit about what the government pressure should actually look like. For example, this will probably be what you defend. Firstly, we say that it is largely shaming in terms of sex education. This means that you're telling women that it is something that is terrible for them, that it will probably be very, very bad for their lives if they opted to have children. The second thing that I want to talk about is the relative tax argument. They get tricky and they're like, oh, but we'll just offer a tax subsidy for wealthy women who decide not to have children. I come from the country with the most complex tax code in the world, and I can tell you that what a tax subsidy means is a relative change in economics, which changes purchasing power, which means that this is a tax on poor people who inevitably have children anyways because they didn't opt into it. This is the argument that they think beats this. The next thing, though, is that we want to say that what their plan does is that it is largely supported by global elite feminists such as Sheryl Sandberg, who support things like lean in and say it is the case, that you probably shouldn't have children, but it's good, it can be good for your career, etc. The problem, though, is that it is oftentimes in these elite types of policy circles where you get these women who actually do a lot of the research and development, who give a lot of the funding to things that make it the case that maternity care can be much cheaper in a lot of developing worlds, right? These things like the Gates Foundation, like USAID, they're doing the work that can actually help them, on their side of the house. But now you have governments of these type of countries literally agreeing with these policy circles, reinforcing their biases, that they don't need to be doing a lot of research and development in these areas, that there are other things that they should be funding, that there are other initiatives that they should be pushing developing countries towards fixing on their side of the house. I think where this becomes particularly damning for them is when they don't answer the arguments about why this is bad in areas where women have to have children compulsorily because of things outside of their control, like religion, etc. The problem then on their side of the house is that having a child is no longer just associated with motherhood, but rather is something that is seen largely in opposition to the West. Take, for example, a Pakistani woman who says that she's not going to have a child because she agrees with the government, and her relatives say, this is something because she wants to have a career, and this is something that they say, this is a norm that you have been reinforced on you by the West, right? We see this in the West, literally, when we have immigrant families who come here, and we have mothers who pursue their own careers in these areas, and then their families back home shame them for saying that you've been westernized in some way and are turning against the culture. The pressure then, comparatively, is one in which not having a child is literally oppositional to the continuation of your religion and culture, which is a much stronger pressure than simply that of motherhood. It means that you were socially shamed by your family. It means that you're socially shamed within your local communities, which are often the ones who are best at giving some type of social welfare on their side of the house. Take, for example, the ability of someone to watch your kids, etc. Take, for example, the ability of someone to give you a job that allows you to have subsistence income outside of your husband. These are the women who largely get left behind, and it is very, very difficult for them to ask the government to give them, any type of welfare. Why is this the case? We agree largely that feminists and feminism is not the same overall. We think, though, that how we fix this isn't by telling women not to have children, it's by expanding social welfare to help the women who do. Our argument is that feminism is about coalition building, and that oftentimes the women at the top currently in the status quo who are opting to not have opted to not having children probably isn't going to be effective on either side of the house. So our argument was that with upper middle income women who on their side of the house decide not to have children, instead reinforces a norm they're able to blame poor women for having children. This may think but that doesn't make a lot of sense because feminists seem to get it. The argument that we gave you is, take for example the United States, right, in which we think that white middle income women are oftentimes the one who control the vote to determine whether or not social welfare will be given to most vulnerable women. We've literally seen this in the status quo with the United States changing welfare policies to punish black women for having more children, meaning that they lacked the ability to get welfare, to get out of the poverty trap, right, to send their kids to a good school, to make sure that they had activities outside of school, to make sure that they had health care at the very least to make them get better. The problem is that when you change the key demographic of middle-income women on their side of the house, it inextricably breaks the feminist coalition. This has real policy impacts. Take, for example, the LGBTQ community, which only the wealthiest benefited from marriage equality, simply because it was once you were married and had health care, then you could give it to your partner, right? Or if you had housing, then you could give it to your partner, while poor LGBT people were left out and nothing's been done because the coalition's been meaningfully fractured after marriage equality. I'll say closing.
So like the problem with your case is that you don't really engage with the idea that there will be social pressures continuously existing to pressure women into motherhood. What are you going to do ensuring that women are at least informed and making their choices?
Yeah, like, as I said before, like, there are going to be people that we care about that are making the rational decision to, like, understand how the next 20 years of their lives are going to be on either side of the house. We are fine to stand by the mechanisms that are actively encouraging women not to have children. I'm interested to hear the new mechanisms that closing might want to get. But our argument was that there are always going to be people who, even when they have this type of shame, right, there's no way for them to internalize it. How many women do we, there's no way for them to internalize it. We see this even by the fact that there are young women today, myself included, who say, I don't want to have a child because I want to have a career, but there's probably going to be a moment, right, where you're not thinking about it when you're having sex, etc., in which you do end up getting pregnant anyways. We tell you that is most likely to happen amongst vulnerable populations. Try to engage with that. Why the population argument here that we gave you at the top of the LO matters is because when we're talking about the coalitional split and the middle-income feminists who oftentimes control policy decisions, the problem on their side of the house is that there's a fracturing of wealth inequality, which was our argument. Because if you have 7 children, you have to split that income among 7 people. But if you only have 1 child or no children, you save that money, meaning that you go to a higher class system, which means your policy issues are aligned with the most wealthy in society, which means you don't actually care about alleviating poverty overall. For these reasons, incredibly proud of those.
Issue that happens to a lot of women with different contexts. In the developed world, companies are disincentivized to hire you because of the liability that companies have to incur if you are pregnant. That's why there's the wage cut. In the developing world, you are possibly going to die because of the lack of access to healthcare associated with how women are treated in these communities. I think that ultimately, given the social pressures that opening opposition seems to want to concede, we think that the powers of the state must exist in order to counter that narrative. I think the opening government argued that sufficiently. I think closing government will extend it to argue why uniquely the harms of childhood ultimately is one that the state must deter. I have 2 unique extensions. The first, why it's principally a line of harm minimization in terms of explaining to you the cost of childbirth in terms of how women are likely going to benefit as a result of not having kids. And second, is it against the feminist agenda? Because that's what the intention of open opposition, all rebuttals will be integrated. I'll call myself back them up. The first question, is it principally consistent with the state's power to restrict autonomy and to minimize harm? We think that we need to understand the cost of motherhood. I think the opening government explains it well, but we need to explain the cost of the children as well. Given the fact that most mothers are ill-informed as what opening opposition conceded about what is the cost of motherhood, the fact that kids are seen as a primary source of fulfillment of their happiness because that religion told them they need to extend their lineage, given that these pressures already exist and most women are not informed of the decision that they make when it comes to their being mothers. What are the consequences of the existing pressure that trickles down to children uniquely in say school? What? That the fact that they have to suffer continuously from the lack of access to food, because if you say that poor mothers are the ones that are likely going to be harmed by the social pressures, the children that are born have to suffer towards hunger, they have to suffer towards the lack of state support because they are disincentivized to help these women because of the social pressures to think that they are less, but they are not that vulnerable. I think that ultimately the harms extend towards children as well. I think that states must do their best to minimize that harm. Because one, kids do not consent to being harmed in the first place. They do not consent to experience harm as a result of the ill-informed choices that their mothers make. I think that states need to interfere to at least minimize the harms that children in the future are likely going to face. That's why in our world, the comparison would be that mothers are likely going to be informed of the consequences of motherhood towards their own children, and therefore their children doesn't have to suffer to the extent of hunger, lack of access to education. If you are talking about minority families, then minority families are at least aware of the consequences of pregnancy towards their own communities. The fact that these communities are already marginalized, at least that they can limit the suffering that their communities are likely going to face, because at least that there will be no children who are suffering in their world as a result of social exclusion, discrimination, microaggression. I think that communities can make a decision if there were to be discriminated. I think that ultimately we limit the harms of what could possibly happen towards the children at their world. I think that the reason why this argument is important is not just about women, about children who are facing those consequences. I think that opening and closing opposition needs to argue why they are okay with children suffering towards that harm. The comparative that happens under that side of the house is one that children are likely going to be vulnerable and exposed to a very worse off quality of life. The fact that they are likely going to be susceptible to intergenerational poverty, because if their families are poor, they are unable to give up opportunities enough to the child, they are likely going to be poor, and their kids are going to be poor, and their kids are going to be poor as well. The chain of suffering is far worse under that side of the house. I think that ultimately the consequences of that suffering is far worse. I think they need to defend with that. I think ultimately, at least states are supportive of mothers who are going to make that decision anyway, but as they are informed, as they know the consequences of pregnancy towards their own child, at least they are now capable to provide a good quality of life to their child, in ensuring that child can be productive, can contribute back towards the state, and doesn't have to suffer to what they have suffered before if they are a minority. That's the comparative that states are likely going to have. That's why the extension is important. I'll take closing.
So this is contingent on proving that these vulnerable women will stop having children, because it becomes worse on your side in cases where they do have children, but the working women with children are taxed more, as what the government says.
But that assumes that they will not be helped. Why are they going to be helped? One, that they are still going to be politically important. That seems to suggest that feminist groups are inclined to give them support. Because it's political suicide if feminist groups exclude these women. Because they need to maintain the moral legitimacy of being inclusive. That's why they are okay with pro-life women in the feminist movement. That's why they are okay with choice feminism in these movements, because they need to maintain an oral legitimacy and oral inclusivity. That's why they are more inclined to still support vulnerable women. That's why they're still inclined to support women who still are going to have children, even with the existence of this policy. I think that you need to explain why they will definitely exclude these people. I think that we will provide an incentive to why exactly they will still want to do that. Second, why we think that the feminist agenda is the feminist agenda is going to empower women directly. Because I think the opening government only wanted to talk about the impacts towards women and not explain the actual impacts. I think that we're going to argue to you why the impacts are important. The first is that if women are deterred from having kids because they are informed about the personal cost, the resources allocated towards themselves are going to make their life significantly better. One, the ability for them to be able to access education is important for them to be able to access the corporate ladder. That normalizes the idea that women can be productive members of society as well, because more men are likely going to be exposed to the capacities of women being able to handle multitasking jobs. So the ability for women to earn a lot of money for them to be able to spend on feminist movements themselves. Ultimately, the impact goes enough to show that we're able to normalize the idea of women not being subjugated to patriarchal norms, because at least they can work, at least they can be educated to such a point they're able to influence policy. If women collectivize enough, I think that the comparative is that more women who are single, who are working, are able to forward feminist causes because they have more money, they are able to donate capital to feminist movements in order for them to be able to galvanize and lobby politicians for effective policy making in the future. I think that's the comparative of what happens if women are deterred from having pregnancy if they were to prioritize themselves. But second, it's just the idea that you do not subjugate yourself to patriarchal norms, because at least the comparison is that if you choose to not have a child, you are less susceptible to the harms of wage gap, because companies are inclined to hire you and pay you equally because you do not incur that much of a liability to them, because that's the benefit that we are able to show to these women, because at least they will not suffer the harms of microaggressions in the workplace, because companies are more likely going to be able to treat them equally as a result of them not being seen as liabilities. That's the impact that is important, because at least it changes the lives of women who choose to have careers, because one, their choices are likely going to be validated as important because motherhood is seen as something that is less socially desirable. But second, it's also about the effects of companies once they see that these people are normalized to the idea of women entering to jobs. That's the comparative impact that's important for you to prove why women are more likely to benefit as a result of this narrative. Never been so proud to propose.
I think the government member, we're very happy to call the member of opposition.
Six things in this speech. Firstly, dealing with the first prong of closing government's extension on the principle. Their principle is of one of harm minimization. But the first thing to say is women around the world, in a large majority of instances, do not view pregnancy as a harm, do not view having a child as a harm, do not view do not view raising a child as a burden. So unclear why we should value it when the women themselves do not. Secondly, as Andrew says, completely contingent on a practical outcomes. The third thing, we have greater harm minimization under our side, as I'm going to tell you in our first extension on the principle, which cuts through and is not contingent on anything else in this debate. The principle is this. Firstly, past government behaviour dictates how you as the panel should weigh arguments. The first thing to say is they have contributed directly to the coercion of women with a number of different policies and mechanisms. First, poor access to abortion. 2, rhetoric and messaging that is incredibly sexist and coerces women into childbearing. Third, the active encouragement of actually making a child, and that is things like baby bonuses that exist all around the world. And the fourth is leaving other institutions unchecked. What this means is that governments have the biggest responsibility to the women they have already coerced into having children, and to help those women and to correct for that wrong that they've done in the past. Why can you not fulfill this principle under the government side? The first thing, opening government literally say these women will now be taxed at a higher rate than women than women who won't have children. Secondly, the rhetoric inherently shames those women as a mental health harm to those women. Thirdly, other people around them shame them. In particular, white women will shame women of ethnicities and women of religion because they think, why didn't you say no like I did? No, thank you. Fourthly, you just give them less help in general policies. Why is this important? This is not contingent on any other practical outcomes in this debate. This tells you why you should value specific outcomes for the most vulnerable individuals, the individuals that the government has victimized in the past. Thirdly, this gives you the reason why you should value all of opening opposition's material in this debate, bringing us over them. Fourthly, this is what makes children suffer, which deals with what government says. And this is more important to try and harm minimize to children we know already exist than children that are potentially going to exist in the future. Secondly, who does this? Why will it be bad? The point of this is to show you why the state isn't going to be influential in changing it for a specific number of groups. So, the first thing to say is that this is going to be done overwhelmingly by men. The reason for this is because governments are dominated overwhelmingly by men. They will have bad policies and awful rhetoric. They might want to say, we will try and put women at the forefront. But given the social consequences of such a policy, it is structurally incredibly unlikely men in power will give up the vast majority of control, or at least all and total control, of the ways this policy is phrased and the way this policy plays out. That is really bad, something we wouldn't support. What are the current views under the status quo? Huge internalized beliefs that are inculcated by the most powerful institutions in society. This is extremely new material to say why women won't believe this, and this is an intuition pump. The desire to have children, the importance of children for women, existed well before the establishment of modern states and modern governments. That is to say, 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, this still existed under the state. It hints at a biological desire, but also cultural and traditional reasons as to why women have changed. So who actually doesn't have children now? It is the women who are most politically engaged and most apathetic to what the state says. That is overwhelmingly white women and not women of colour. Next thing, how do people react? Let's talk about women. They opening government say, in response to our point of information, the state are legitimate in doing this. But we say, actually, they've misinterpreted what we were going to say in that. We're actually saying that women, in particular women of colour, will have a negative reaction to this. Why? It's because of the internalized beliefs I hinted at all. They will not feel supported at all, as Closing wants to say in this debate. What does this translate into? They will ignore this direction by the government and continue to have children and lock themselves into worse situations. And it constitutes a direct attack on the culture and the beliefs and the traditions of these individuals, which is something we do not think the state should do on a principle level. We also think those who coerce women into doing this will be even worse under their side and put women in even further physical danger under their side. Now, outcomes for women. 4 things to say. This shames women, as opening says, but most importantly, devalues motherhood. At CO we say this devalues the incredibly important work of women during motherhood. The principal reason this is bad is because this ignores the massive burden women historically have taken on for society in raising the children who have comprised that society in the future. Practically this is bad because in, for instance, court cases where divorce settlements where it's important to value the work women did in raising a child when it comes to settling up property and other things and income, that is really bad. Importantly, you know this is going to be the case because there's an asymmetry in belief. White people will believe that this gov side is more moral and are less likely to reward women of colour who had children and raised those children in settlements. On your career, no thank you. Both government branches want to say this will advance your career. The first thing to say, not mutually exclusive. If they have the political capital to do all of these different policies, we can have things like paternity leave, we can have things that beef up discrimination laws. This heightens racial factors. The perception is white women will do this and women of colour will not. That plays into the material Closing government giving about things in interviews. Before I move on, Closing.
So like you're assuming that feminist movements just fight among each other and therefore you're likely going to exclude persons of colour. Given the fact that they need an aura of legitimacy of being inclusive, why they are incentivized to do all the harms that you talk about?
But it's not the feminist movement we're saying is fighting, it's the other institutions which tell women that they need to have children, the church, the culture, the traditions. Lastly, you get socially shamed by your employer to make this decision. This extends upon the shame mechanisms that directly attacks government side. Happiness. People value having children in a significant way. My mum thinks that me and my sister are the most important thing in her life. Often this can be the best way to fulfill yourself in your life because many individuals will still have children because the state hasn't contributed to the fact they have children. Government bench say women will be seen as secondary. Another bit of extension. 1, this imbues positive characteristics upon women of being sharing and kind and motherly and peaceful and being good at solving disputes and things like that. It gives more women in standing in matriarchal societies, and importantly, women can weaponize this to give them more agency in the workplace. Fourthly, our comparative is to empower women to do exactly this, and this deals with the material we hear from Closing government and engages directly with the second prong of their extension on how we can get women better career outcomes. Lastly in this speech, about the comparative. The burden of the government side of this debate, was to not just fight back against coercion of women. We are happy to do that to the fullest extent on the opposition. It was to tell people who have made a completely informed decision they should still not have a child. They were never able to fulfill this burden, more than proud to oppose.
The opposition member, we're very happy to call the government whip to conclude the bench here.
Describe closing opposition is that it's very privileged. Because in most number of circumstances, the only women you say that would want to opt into motherhood do not really want to opt into motherhood. It's because either things like religion or culture that coerces them and that indoctrinates them into believing that they must opt into motherhood, that pressures them into motherhood. But to second, it's things like huge glorification of motherhood we see in things like pop culture, things that we see in culture where we glorify mothers to a point where we tell other women that you must be like them, you must try to be like your mothers. So the reason why people opt into motherhood isn't because they want to, but rather because they were pressured by society, because they were pressured by their cultures and religion. We think they do nothing to counter this pressure, to counter the coercion that exists. At least we are doing something. We think a world that we live in is a far better world. Firstly, all of the opening and closing opposition's argument is contingent upon one thing, that there will be women of color, specifically, who will still opt into culture, who still opt into motherhood because their culture pressures them to do so. Why is it that this is untrue, or at least there will be less women of color who opt into motherhood as well? So the first thing to say is that I completely disagree with this premise, right? Because we've previously limited a lot of cultural practices that were also regressive and horrible to people, and we successfully did that, right? Yes. Previously, child marriage was accepted in a lot of countries in Asia, but when the state took an active stance about it and said to people that you must not allow your child to marry if they are not above the age of 18, above the age of consent, therefore that is not allowed. We think when the state takes an active stance, therefore they are able to have the power and legitimacy to able to counter the coerciveness and the huge amount of pressure that comes from cultures and religion. But secondly, religion and culture are getting less and less powerful in today's day and age. The reason why is because generally individuals are getting more and more progressive because the access of education, the increase of development means people have access to information through globalization and internet, means that people are aware of the legitimate how legitimate religion is, and how they are able to widen their worldview outside of religion. So generally, people are aware religion and culture don't have as much power as they tell us to. But secondly, you do nothing to go against the coercion of religion. But notice, they say, oh, but we can have education as well to tell women that there's risk to motherhood. But the first thing we would say is that if you say religion is as powerful as you say, then education is not enough for you to go against a religion and a culture that is so strong for you to pressure other women. So we say that when a state that is equally as powerful as a religious institution, a state that has legitimacy to put on legal actions, or for example, to put on active measures and to tell its people, it's wrong for you to pressure women into going to motherhood. Women should not be mothers at all. We think that's the moment when you are able to ensure that that coercion and pressure is able to be minimized under our side of the house. That's how we get women to become mothers less, and that's how it's not just about women of color. It's not just about white women. It's about all women as well. So, secondly, let's assume that there are mothers who still opt into motherhood. What happens then? The first is that we're not just going to ignore them and allow them to live in the streets and discriminate them. Obviously, there are anti-discrimination laws. There are measures to be taken to ensure that your children are being fed to, obviously. But the only thing that we do is to actively discourage women who are currently right now who want to opt into motherhood. We will tell them there are risks to motherhood. It will be painful. It will be hard taking care of a child up to a point where they reach the age of consent. It will be brutal. Those are the things that the state can do, irrespective or independent of whatever welfare system that we have. But secondly, sure, there will still, even if we agree that there are still women who do, irrespective of that, do still opt into motherhood. But under our side, at least they are informed and educated as to what are the risks of motherhood and what are the risks of childbirth. At least they know the consequences of being a mother, because the state actively tells all women who are right now trying to be mothers mother because of X, Y, Z harms. That informed choice is far better than individuals, women who are vulnerable, being susceptible to the pressures and coercions of a religious institution that you wanted to empower because you say, but it's a legitimate choice because they are coerced into it. No, we don't think it's a legitimate choice. They must be informed of the consequences, and the state must take the responsibility for that only.
What makes us better than our closing is that we weren't talking about cultural institutions. Our argument was that women do not make rational, calculated choices when having sex. Conversely, they do when they're deciding politics, and quite literally provide a financial incentive for them to go against the inclusive policies that you defend on your side of the house.
Okay, I guess this is an argument about the demographic and the population shrinkage, right? But the first we would say, obviously people would still vote on policies that still benefit themselves. So there will still be mothers who are part of the voting bloc who still vote for things like, welfare for their children, for example. I'm unsure why any of the political things that happen on your side will change. It's just that the population becomes smaller. But secondly, the more important discussion in this debate is children and how it impacts your children. Because if you say that your mothers opt into motherhood without being informed because they make mistakes in their lives, then what happens to their children? Oftentimes, you resort to mothers who are abusive to their children because they blame their children for their existence. Oftentimes, you allow children to live in poverty because their mothers are never able to afford. Because you say so yourself, they do not make financial plans when they become mothers. Ultimately,